Safe. We're only running about 7 minutes behind schedule. It's fine. Less time for me to have to talk.
Well, first night of a con, that's actually pretty good. Pretty much
Yeah.
the schedule.
Yeah. And luckily I am the last public event in this room, so we shouldn't be rushed out too quickly. First of all, I'll tell you guys a little bit about myself. I go to a lot of conventions. I've gone to so many conventions I decided I wanted to start presenting at conventions, but I don't really have any skills other than cooking, so I spent some time figuring out how can I make my cooking equate to things at the con. And eating your drink at the Etiquette and Indulgence track is probably one of the best things I can thought of. I'm not really a professionally trained chef. I do everything, except for maybe the occasional item, some high-speed mixer. Everything I use is what you'll find in the average kitchen. So anything I've made here today, you can go home and make. I do post the recipes on my Facebook page and on my personal blog. So if you're interested in trying them, you're more than welcome to go look them up. And I'm a bit of a science nut, so I like to Science! I like to learn why things you put in a recipe react the way they do, why it's necessary, and can I leave them out. So things like we will be tasting a red wine cake in a little while. It is actually gluten-free, and I was curious as to how the wine would react to a gluten-free box mix. And luckily, it turned out just fine. I did taste it before I brought it to you guys.
Sweet or dry wine?
It's kind of a sweet wine, and now that you mention that, I realized I forgot the bottles. I was going to show off the different bottles of things that I had made. Oh, that's fine. My sister's up in the room getting my laptop. But I was expecting to have a large presentation screen, so I have a slideshow which none of you get to see, and I'm kind of using that as a guidance system. Let's see, what else? We'll be talking about some of the myths with cooking with alcohol. Some things you currently probably think are true and aren't actually. We'll be talking about factual things about cooking with alcohol that you don't know or may not know, but will help you when you're deciding what to put into your food. We'll talk about tips and tricks to figure out how best to cook with alcohol. I mean, you don't want to just throw anything you have on hand into something unless you know how it's going to react. And then we'll show you how some dishes will taste with the addition of alcohol. I do have a beer bread, a red wine cake, red wine jelly, and several different variations of what I like to call rosy caramels. They have different flavors of rosy. Unfortunately, only part of them are wrapped, so if you guys go through more than I already have wrapped, I'll be cutting them by hand right in front of you. They are salted as well, so if you don't go for the salted thing, careful caramels. What we will not be talking about are actual mixed drinks. If you are interested in mixed drinks or infusions or anything like that, Rambly Labs does some excellent presentations, and they will be doing them all throughout the week. So definitely check them out. Okay, the first thing, and this one's going to be difficult because the most common myth, I have this chart, which you'll not be able to see, but I'll try to read off and not be too boring about it. One of the most common myths is that your alcohol will cook out your dish. This is not true. Alcohol has a low boiling point. This is true. However, it tends to bond with the water molecules in the rest of your dish. So unless you're cooking it for an extended period of time with a lot of other liquid, you'll dry it out before you cook out all the alcohol. However, you do cook out a percentage. For example, if you just drink it straight up, you're drinking 100% alcohol. If you boil it briefly and then remove it, you have up to 85% of the alcohol content still remaining in the dish. And this goes on, if you flambe it real quick, 75% of the alcohol, which is surprising. You would think if you set it on fire, it burns all the way. No, 75% of your alcohol is still in there. And the list goes on and on. The longer you cook it, the less alcohol content. But even if you cook it for 2.5 hours, you'll still have 5% of the alcohol content that was originally put into the dish. Another myth is that you tenderize your meat with alcohol. That's also not true. And while I have not personally tested this out, Alta Brown, who does Good Eats, which any cooking and science lover should probably watch frequently, he does an episode called Fermentation Nation, where he shows how a marinade, a wine marinade, overnight versus a full 24 hours, really doesn't penetrate the meat all that much. In order to tenderize, it has to fully penetrate the meat. So when putting alcohol in a marinade, you could use as much just adding flavor. You have to look for other areas to tenderize it, like acids or lime juice, that sort of thing. That will really tenderize your meat. That's pretty much it on the myths. So if you've heard anything else, it's probably true. Why do we cook with alcohol? If it doesn't tenderize, if it doesn't cook out, why do we do it? And then how do we do it? The main reason we cook with alcohol is it adds flavor. I mean, you have a great stout beer, put it in your bread, you're going to have a pretty tasty bread. Bread's not bad on its own, but you add in stout beer. Chocolate cake, not bad. Red wine chocolate cake, it's just a whole nother notch of food. So that's frequently why we add alcohol to our food. It adds a lot of flavor. It is delicious. Booze is good. And actually, Julia Child once made a comment. Her quote is, "I love cooking with wine. Occasionally, I'll even put it in food." So, I'll get on that topic later. I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but we'll move on to it. Helps reactions in a dish based on temperature. For example, anyone who's had cheese fondue probably notices you start with a base of white wine or some sort of beer. This is because it lowers the boiling point, where the cheese will melt without curdling. So that is one of the main purposes that wine is added to fondue. If you put a bottle of beer into flour, you don't have to add yeast. It will rise and be nice and fluffy on its own. Because the beer has its own yeast, causes the fermentation and the gluten action in the bread, and it lifts up, and it's a magical thing. I think the bread that I made had 4 ingredients in it. Really easy. You stir it up real quick, throw it in the pan, put it in the oven, forget about it. So understanding how alcohol affects what you put it into, temperature is one of those things. It can act as a leavening agent, which I just said, you put the beer into flour. When you put it into a gluten-free cake mix, it won't really react because there's no gluten in the cake mix. The beer reacts with the gluten in the flour. Anyone who's gluten-free, who has the allergies, who understands the differences, why you kind of have to adjust for that down the line. So you don't have to worry about adding beer to a gluten-free mix, or you may, if you're expecting it to rise up and it just kind of becomes a brick. It spares you the shame of wasting good alcohol. If you opened up a bottle of beer and then realize you're not going to finish it, you're not going to drink it, it turned out not really to be to your caring, instead of dumping it down the drain, make a batch of beer, make a batch of chili. It's really good in soups. There's many things just to Google away to. I talked a lot faster than I was expecting. Which is good. It means we have more time for what we're going to be tasting. And
do you ever use ciders in your cooking?
I do not use ciders because I tend to drink them too quickly. I would imagine ciders would be similar to beer. One rule of thumb that I referenced the fermentation nation episode of Good Eats earlier. One good line of reasoning that Old Brown mentioned is to decide whether to use beer or whether to use wine. Think of it this way: if it would taste good with bread, you'll use beer. If it would taste good with like a fruity blackcurrant jam, you'll use wine. Because wine tends to have a fruitier flavor to it, while the beer is yeasty, strong. So like cheeses go great with beer. Some people would argue cheeses go great with wine, but it's not quite as close rule of thumb. Sorry.
What about liqueurs, like the Kahluas, the rums, any of the daiquiris, or?
Those pretty much, you're using those for flavor. You're not really using those for anything else. So, for example, I do have 3 kinds of caramels. I have a Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey, a Crown Royal Maple Finish Bourbon, and a Captain Morgan's Black Spiced Rum caramel. The recipes are exactly the same. The only difference is the alcohol I put into them. Just a slight enough difference that when you're tasting them side by side, you're kind of like, oh, that's interesting how it reacts differently, how it flavors it differently. It's kind of a way to taste the alcohols without the huge burn and resulting hangover of actually tasting the alcohols. Let's see, where was I going with the other comment? I can't recall. But we'll be tasting it looks like the cake will be first. And I'll tell you right now, I took it to work and I left it on the break room table and I didn't tell anybody what it was. I just left it there. Because it's not like they'll ask anymore. And a little while later, it was practically gone. I came out and said, hey, how'd everyone like it? Oh, it was good. It's denser than cake. It's almost like a thick brownie. And I said, yeah, that's probably because it's gluten-free. They're like, what? Horrified that they've eaten something that's, gluten-free. But no, it's really good cake. And the recipe I used, swear to God, this is all you do. You can do it with a regular cake mix, you can do it with gluten-free. Take your cake mix, where it says water, replace that with wine. That's it. Follow the recipe exactly the same way, otherwise you come out with a red wine cake that is delicious.
So is that what this is a red wine cake?
It is. It's a red wine chocolate cake made with a gluten-free cake mix. I was told there might be some people attending my panel who are gluten-free. I was trying to be considerate. Here's some beer bread. Here's this and here's that. You can't have any of it.
Yeah.
No, I spent 10 years not eating beef, and I understand how it is kind of be on the other side, watching everyone eat everything, really being hungry. So I try not to do that. I have a red wine jelly, which you can eat just straight out of the cup. I will not admit to doing that. Or you can spread it on the beer bread. The red wine jelly, again, is a very simple recipe. Bottle of wine, bunch of sugar, some pectin, a little bit of lemon juice to cut the sweet. Boil it, pour it in a bowl. You're done. I love simple recipes. Not only do they tend to be better for you because you're not adding God knows what to the pan, but I love pouring done. Can't get better than that. The beer bread, again, very, very simple recipe. I wound up using brown sugar instead of white sugar, although I did find a recipe that called for that because I was iced in. I come from Columbia, South Carolina, and I'm sure those of you from around this area know what happened a few days ago. And I ran out of sugar. I was making 6 batches of caramels and cake and bread and jelly, and I just kind of ran out of sugar. So I said, let me go see if I can find brown sugar recipes. Google is great. You type it in, you will probably find it there. You just have to kind of know what you're doing because some recipes will be like, do this, and you look at it and you're like, yeah, that won't turn out so great if I do it the way you're telling me. You're assuming I know things. And then the caramels do have a lot of butter, a lot of cream, a lot of sugar, a little bit of alcohol. That's another thing about cooking with alcohol. Everyone's always like, oh my God, I can't eat this, it has alcohol in it. You take 2 ounces of alcohol, you put it in, cook it, it gets down to about, 65% of its alcohol content. That's 65% of what was in what you put in, not 65% of what you have is now alcoholic. Then you cut it up and you serve it. So out of this 2 ounces, you have maybe 1/4 teaspoon of alcohol each. You get more of a buzz off of rinsing with mouthwash. So I consider my boozy caramels travel safe. I mean, I'm not going to judge people if they, back off on them for whatever reason they back off. But personally, I'm just like, I'll give them to my 4-year-old niece any day. I'm more worried about the sugar content than I am about the alcohol content. The way, and while she's cutting, this is my lovely sister Haley. While she's cutting everything else out, I will let you guys sample caramels and mix them up. They are color-coded. The salt on top will indicate what kind you're trying. The white salt is the standard honey. The black salt is the rum. That's rum. And that's the honey. Yes, the Jack Daniels honey. And the ones where you can barely tell where there's any salt in them at all because it's pink and it melted into the caramel, that is the maple finish program. And like I said, if we run out of any particular kind, that's the maple finish right there. I'll be more than happy to cut some. I do sell them on Etsy. That's the rum. Yeah, I do sell them on Etsy, so go back to the
What's your Etsy shop called?
if you want to try more than one, you are more than welcome to fish around the bowl and figure out.
What's your Etsy shop called?
I'm sorry?
What's your shop called on it?
It's Etsy's, Esdee Spot. I do have a card.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll put a card out.
Okay.
Just like, okay, here, just pass it around. Help yourselves, ladies and gentlemen.
Jelly is it's pretty much, you can make any jelly you want on.
You can.
Half liquid, half sugar, and your packet.
Oh. I'm over here.
pH is too low, it's adding a little sugar.
Okay, cards. I forgot they were in my pouch. You have cards. Again, pass them around. I will admit, I've had some people tell me that they think the caramels are a little pricey on my shop, but I make them all by hand, I wrap them all by hand, I use high quality ingredients. I'm not skimping on anything, so I've seen some places that charge more and they mass produce everything by machine, so. It probably takes me an average of 2 hours for every batch of caramel I do.
Look at them and they have no visible salt.
And how many caramels?
Do I get out of a batch? I would say it's probably about 1.25 pounds. Cause I sell them by the pound, I don't sell them by size. And sometimes I'm lazy, I'll just cut them big, and grab fewer of them. And sometimes I'm like, well, cut them smaller, it looks like you get more. But I do sell them by the pound. And I tend to, when I ship them out, I weigh them a little heavy, because I would rather have people get too much than too little. Especially since, sometimes personally I can be a little cheap. I don't know.
Well, not to mention in case the weight changes because one of your traveling.
That's another thing about these particular caramels. They do react to temperature. They get warm really quickly.
Is black the rum?
Black is the rum. Because it's black rum, so works. Let's see, are there any questions? I will answer them to the best, about anything cooking wise. I have 2 panels tomorrow, one that is the science or the history of candy, which, is only interesting to me because I'm weird like that. And then the other is the science behind candy, and there will be more candy samplers tomorrow. I have just a plain, simple, 1-pot caramel, and then I have marshmallows that I made from scratch, and those will all be sampled tomorrow. Unfortunately, my hard candies had to bite the dust due to the lack of sugar. I was like, okay, do I do boozy caramels or do I do hard candies? No one ate all the hard candies last time, so I'll do boozy caramels. Yeah, at least I can settle it later. I may actually start doing the jellies on my site as well. I just have to figure out how to can. Practice it a couple times, make sure it's safe. I don't like sending people something I wouldn't trust myself. I'm also going to start experimenting with doing, say, Tennessee honey jelly. I think spreading that on some toast or a drop in your tea would be excellent.
They just had an amazing caramelized onion and bacon jam in the restaurant.
That sounds
Throw
good.
some booze in there.
That was the other thing this one I actually made and then left at home. Is a salted whiskey candied bacon caramel. Where I candied bacon, put a layer at the bottom of the pan, poured the caramel on top after I got my cookie again. Waited the 10 minutes. When you make caramels, you don't immediately sprinkle salt on top. It'll just melt right down into the caramels, so you don't really want it to sit on top. So you wait 10 minutes for it to cool slightly. And wait the 10 minutes and the bacon starts floating. And I can see bits of bacon poking up out of the caramel. And unfortunately, I left that at home. I got a text from my sister saying, "Mom says you're nuts." And I said, "Well, enjoy it, because I ain't getting it." Someone's got to eat it. So yeah, that was a little painful, but I love experimenting with things. I'll do the recipe properly first. Not only just to see how it's supposed to turn out, but to find out flaws in it. Recently I did a panel back in September for Anime Week in Atlanta on Japanese snack foods. And one of the recipes was for a bread. And again, I tell you, be careful when you're looking on Google for recipes. This recipe kind of assumed that you understood how bread worked. And it's like the steps read, do this, do this, do this, do this. However, if you are an actual baker, you realize, well, while you're doing this other stuff's going to warm up too much to be able to handle it properly. And what I wound up, it looked terrible. I mean, it looked like something my 3-year-old niece would do. It tasted excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rework the recipe, post that, link the original recipe because I don't like plagiarizing. I had wanted to be a writer at one time in my life, so plagiarizing is a big no-no for me. And then post, here's what you should do, just so that you guys don't have to figure it out yourself. So I'll be experimenting with various different alcohols, because my concern is that the amount of alcohol, I mentioned alcohol changes temperature, sometimes it changes consistency. Anyone who's made Jello shots knows you can't just pour, all of your alcohol into your Jello powder and get a proper Jello shot. So I have to figure out what will be the ratio using bourbon as opposed to wine, because wine has a lower alcohol content, so your volume has more water than a bourbon. And I don't want to make a batch of bourbon jelly and wind up with bourbon syrup. Then again, that's the great thing about the candy experiments. Rarely do you wind up with something you can't eat. The first time I made the salted whiskey caramels was when I first made. My very first batch, I was using a terrible thermometer, cooked them too little. Wound up with a big batch of caramel sauce. It was still delicious. I mean, you sit there and eat it with a spoon. I mean, you eat it right out of the wrapper, you may as well eat it with a spoon. It just sounds terrible. I'm eating it with a spoon. Second batch was fine. Third and fourth batch, I overcooked and they became toffee. Again, toffee's good. Toffee's delicious. Crack it up. If you like crunching on stuff, it's great. Wasn't what I was looking for though. So, rarely when experimenting with candies do you wind up with something you can't eat. Baking is a different story.
Oh, yeah.
Bricks are not good to gnaw on. Overly floured things are not good to gnaw on. Burnt, exploded, because it was overly leavened. Anyone who's put an item into the oven and then later came to find out that its Cthulhu had risen and now it's exploded all over your oven and all over the bottom, and you're never going to get that smell out.
Or the double yeast where you have to hit it back down, or else it doesn't, it's heavy, it's not the light bread.
Yeah. Although that is fun because it's great for stress relief. And being the oldest of 5, and I work at a TV station behind the scenes, so I have to deal with the talent. That kind of explains why I have multiple cameras sitting around.
The adult children.
Yeah, the adult children, great stress relief. Why don't we start passing out cake? Who wants to try cake? Okay.
Oh,
Is it-
cake.
If you guys want to line up, or I'll bring it to you. Okay, you go ahead and grab the jelly while it's here. But we don't have the bread out yet.
You know, that you were talking about the different ways things turned out. Something I discovered with pound cake. My mom has a 100-year-old family recipe, and one of the things it does is that you're supposed to put in flour, alternate between the flour and the milk mix, milk sugar mix. You alternate those two, and it makes this good, really solid pound cake. And I was short on time one time, and I was like, all right. I just put all of it together into a big into the big blender. And what it did is it made it into a sponge cake.
Because of the amount of air.
Yeah, it was a beautiful sponge cake. But I found that I could do that and let it sit for 10 minutes while I got the things greased, and it would give me the same
Chocolate red wine
consistency as if I had
red wine
alternated
jelly.
back and
We're getting
forth.
ready to add some.
So it was great. I found a way to get the air back out fast.
Jelly.
Yeah.
Not jello, but jelly. What? The bread.
Oh, you okay?
I'm fine. I'm just more
Is your stuff
worried
okay?
about what. That's fine. Everything is good. You're safe.
I have come for the cigars.
I'm
You
tempted to
missed,
just
you missed
pass
out
the
the good
bread
vaping
around
that
you
was
guys.
going on earlier.
I'm sorry. If I'm going to inhale something, it should be burning. All my own fashion.
Whatever, long bottom's great.
Actually, still the alcohol in that jelly.
Slice it.
Did your camera turn off?
Yeah, I was about to mention, now I've forgotten what you're talking about, leavening, feeding,
Too much air in the recipe.
too much air in the recipe. Yeah, I lost my train of thought tripping over our laptop.
Not really a big one.
I know that you have a pound cake, but even when it's all the same ingredients, just because they're alternating, I blended it.
Part of my family comes from Germany, and there's this German plum cake that is just fantastic. And my mother searched for years trying to find a recipe for it. Finally, she found what looked like the recipe online. However, again, the person who wrote the recipe wrote it as somebody who knows what they're doing, and not really as someone who's just picking up the recipe and trying to do it. So, areas where it would say, use these kinds of plums, most people would be like, oh, I can use any kind of plum. Well, no, the kind of plum they're talking about is a very firm, almost underripe type of plum, but flavor is very tart. If you use any old plum in your plum cake, it's going to wind up being this gooey mass. And again, maybe not bad if you like gooey masses of food, but not great if you were expecting a European plum cake. So, everything's trial and error. My entire family are culinary inspired, and so I grew up in that atmosphere. And I was greatly surprised when I was talking to someone and they didn't realize you could make cocktail sauce at home. And that's just the kind of, I don't frown upon anyone who doesn't make their own food, but it strikes me as odd whenever I run into that.
I mean, cooking from scratch, it's interesting how many people didn't realize, I talked to people and they didn't realize you could make macaroni and cheese by the Kraft cheese box.
Yeah, this is true. You also have the number of people who don't realize how easy. Yeah, a lot of cooking is easier than it sounds. These are really large pieces of bread, I would mention. Who wants bread? And I'm hoping this was the one recipe I didn't try because I don't actually like beer, so I keep it around the house. I have a special order, go to a store to buy a bottle of beer. I don't want to buy an entire case. And the beer I used is supposed to have essence of banana and cinnamon. I thought that would be great in bread because who doesn't like banana bread?
Yeah.
But again, this is a case of where you're using it for flavor. And it probably is really good with the jelly. So if you want more jelly, if you want more of anything, feel free to come help yourself because I have to take it all home otherwise, where I will eat it.
A little bit bitter. Was it a stout beer?
It was I don't think it was, I think it was a porter. Is that the same? But like I said, I don't drink beer, so I'm not really.
Last time I had it, I tried a banana beer, it wasn't heavy.
Well, it's one in bread and may or may not have had some.
I remember my mom had always told us how to make stroganoff, and you put the wine in it. My brother put the wine towards the end.
And did it curdle the cream?
It was a little bit on the bitter side. It didn't quite curdle, but all my sips were wanting to go to bed nice and early.
Yeah, that is kind of one of the things. Sometimes alcohol, you hear, it'll lower the boiling point in fondue so it doesn't curdle the cheese. However, it will curdle cream if you just mix it together. That's why you have some of those really atrocious brain hemorrhage shots where they pour cream into straight alcohol and it just eats itself alive. Still tastes fine. I mean, it just looks terrible. Is the bread good? I mean, if it's bad, I'll I'll go home and hang my head in shame.
It needs butter. It needs a butter of some sort.
You mentioned that. I made sure this bread was vegan friendly. In case there were any vegans in the room and they would have something to eat. The jelly actually called for, if any of you ever make jelly, just a touch of butter. I mean, just a tiny bit. Because what happens when you make jelly is it oils and the bubbles rise to the top, and if they don't evaporate quickly, they kind of gelatinize there and it forms a scum. A little bit of butter gives it enough fat content where it breaks the surface immediately when it gets to the top, instead of forming that scum. Instead of using butter, I used a teaspoon of olive oil, just enough to provide that fat content and keep it vegan friendly. The gluten-free cake is not vegan friendly because the mix is called for 4 eggs. Never used 4 eggs in a cake in my life, and it turned out pretty worth it. You're welcome to eat some if you want. No.
It's safe.
She has to go home with me, so.
There is something called Earth Balance I've got, in which it tastes like spreadable butter. You would not, it's completely vegan, but you would think that it was just soft butter. It actually is, it's the only thing I found that has the consistency, so I can use it as in place of butter on recipes, and it actually gives me the same consistency.
I'm always a little leery of using anything that isn't, butter or
Yeah.
olive oil, because a lot of times they use so many chemical compounds to give it that same consistency. Like margarine will react differently in a recipe than
Oh,
butter
yes.
does.
Yes.
Completely different. You make 2 batches of cookies, one with margarine, one with butter, you'll see immediately that there's a difference.
I actually prefer cookies made with margarine.
No, I mean, and again, that's understandable. If there is,
Shortening has a completely different.
it does. It has a very different consistency. Most of the time, that's why it's a good idea to understand why it is you're using. The red wine in the cake is there simply for flavor. It's fine if you want to use grape juice, if you want to use ginger ale.
I've seen so many recipes online where they replace the water in a box recipe with soda or.
Oh, I don't know about energy drinks now, but
Highly caffeinated cake.
yeah, I'm not sure about the energy drinks, but yeah, I've seen soda. I got in a conversation with my dad. He loves the Arby's horseradish sauce, and so we got him a bottle for Christmas. They're bottling it now, and he was saying you could use it anywhere you would use mayonnaise. I said, well, you wouldn't use it in chocolate cake. And he looks at me, who puts mayonnaise in chocolate cake? I said, well, mayonnaise is eggs and oil. You can put it in chocolate cake to give it a better mouthfeel. You're not like spreading it on your chocolate cake. You're not going to put the horseradish flavored mayonnaise in the chocolate cake.
Making the mayonnaise based biscuits.
And it saves you the step of putting the 2 different ingredients in together.
Got that little trace of vinegar. Gives it a nice taste.
Yeah, one thing, thinking back on the temperatures, using alcohol lowers the boiling point. That also means it lowers the freezing temperature. So if you're making ice cream or anything that you will need to chill or freeze to get a firmness, you're going to have to freeze it for longer or chill it for longer because it will not firm up properly if you use too much alcohol, which is another reason why Jell-O doesn't really set. You have to get it so very, very cold to reach that setting point. That's why you can stick your bottle of vodka in the freezer and you come out with a deliciously chilled vodka and not a vodka.
I once stuck a bottle of vodka in the freezer and it came out like heaven. That was smeared on.
Yeah, I was going to say, that doesn't sound like a higher class.
That was some Smirnoff blueberry. It was only good for cooking with that.
I'll tell you that in Chicago, where I was, it had been I had been up there in business, and they had the negative 44 degrees and everything. They were actually, some people were recommending, grab some cheap alcohol and pour it, because you could use that to melt things, and you couldn't use anything else.
Yeah, because it would probably crack immediately if you tried to use anything else to melt that ice. There is a reason they call it fire water. And alcohol, unfortunately, has a false impression that it warms you. What it does is it forces the blood to your extremities and it makes you feel warmer, but it's actually dropping your core body temperature. I'm sure if any of you watch Mythbusters, they did a piece on that. And you'd probably die of hypothermia faster drinking alcohol to try to protect yourself from the cold than you would otherwise if you just wanted to. Losing a few fingers, that's fine. Losing temperature in your heart, that's bad. Any other questions, comments? People just want to hang out and chat? I ran through my topic so quickly because I didn't have a fancy PowerPoint to keep me slow.
It sucks me.
This is Richard, one of our directors for the Etiquette and Diligence track, so anything you find in this room, you can thank him and Peter and Emily for having coordinated everything.
Sorry about the PowerPoint.
No, it's fine. It worked. I'm talking. I can talk. Oh, and there's if anyone wants to take some with them, I don't actually have containers you can take it. But I drink. I ate like 3 or 4. Yeah, this is easy drink. I've actually raced all through my cup, but if you want to try some food, they already have the food.
It's delicious, it's all delicious.
There are caramels on the table in various flavors. There's a salted honey whiskey, I'm just gonna use the short forms, a maple bourbon, and a black rum.
Black rum has black flags.
There's a chocolate cake made with red wine. It is gluten-free, if you're worried about that sort of thing. That's a red wine jelly. And then there is some beer bread around the corner.
Your bread, I think, would taste very good with the jelly on it.
Yeah, that's actually what I had originally planned on doing, and I cannot remember why I decided to. Well, probably because, some people like, they want to try the jelly, but they don't want to try the bread. I try to give options. I'm terrible about options. But the world is full of options today. You ever go to the store and you just want to buy something simple, and you're presented with 6 options?
Go to Aldi's.
I only went to Aldi's once. I remember I went in there and I went right out with what I was getting. That's probably why, because I didn't have to stand there and decide. Oh, let's see now. I promised tomorrow's talks to be longer if you are actually up at 10 a.m. to do that. I know Friday night it's be a little chaotic. I'd like to sleep in. As far as things that tenderize your meat, I said wine and alcohol will not do it. Lime juice will, pretty much anything acidic. Tomato juice will. I made an excellent tequila, hot sauce, and lime marinade. Put some chicken breasts in it. Made the mistake of leaving it in too long. By the time they came out of the bag, they looked like they were already cooked. They were not. I cut through them. Found that out. But
Did they taste good then?
they tasted good once they were cooked, yes. I'm brave in the area of culinary. I'll eat just about anything, but raw chicken is not one of those things. I cut into my chicken at a restaurant if it's the slightest bit of pink. It's like, no. I'm afraid to send another takeaway. However, I will eat a steak blue rare. You're making faces, you know what that means. Blue rare means you basically sear it on the outside and it's still cool from the center. You may as well just put the fear of fire in a cow and send it out to the table. Let's see, what else do I make with alcohol? You're not supposed to know what I make with alcohol. Coq au vin, which is a very heavily wine-based, is again made with flavor. I've made a coq au vin fondue broth. Terrific. You'll find that wine starts to lose some of its fruitiness the longer you cook it. So if you are cooking with wine, reserve, several tablespoons out of whatever the recipe called for. Add it back in at the end of the recipe, just a few minutes before you serve it so it warms up properly. Gives it that full wine flavor that you want. Otherwise, it'll be a little bland. The red jelly recipe I made, actually someone experimented with, and on their blog they talked about how they took out a cup and a third and reduced it down to 2/3 of a cup, so it would be just that more potent, and they added that at the end. And that's what gives it a good punch of flavor, as opposed to just being kind of like,
good wine flavor to it.
yeah.
Have you ever made beurre blanc or beurre rouge sauces?
I have not. I don't cook a lot of sauces. I definitely will. I know the last time I did a presentation, someone asked about making gluten-free Pocky, and I immediately went home and looked into it. Last year I did a presentation on, it was the shorter version of what I'll be doing tomorrow. Science of candy making. They want to know how to make sugar-free candy at home, which I found out depends on what your definition of sugar-free. If your definition of sugar-free is 0 carbs, don't bother. You're using so many chemicals in it, you may as well just buy it off the shelf. If your definition of sugar-free is, all natural, no sugar added from fruit, much easier, but you're going to wind up with a softer consistency, whatever you make, because it's not going to have the sugar to help firm it up. Sugar crystallizes the longer you cook it.
You probably make more jelly-based things.
Yeah. All natural natural fruit candies are mostly gonna be jellies.
What about stuff that has some like fire?
I've never cooked with stevia, but the reason that I'm always leery about using like what they call sugar substitutes, like stevia, even if they're natural, is that sugar has a scientific component of how it crystallizes and cooks that the other stuff does not necessarily always have. So I could experiment with making, say, hard candy out of it, but from all of my research of just looking at things on Google, and I spent several days looking through, 15, 20 Google search pages to make sure something wasn't buried in the back. Most of the time, they all said to buy some sort of chemical that would harden it, as opposed to,
If you want a good laugh, look up the reviews for sugar-free gummy bears.
Oh, yes.
That's hilarious.
yeah,
That's-
I can say from experience,
That's about what you should expect from sugar-free candy.
yeah, if you buy them.
Sorbitol.
The zero carb, sugar-free candy, yeah, it's not a pleasant experience. At least not if you eat them like you would normally eat gummy bears. If you eat like 2 or 3, you're fine. You eat a handful. Make sure you have a facility available to race into shortly. Because otherwise,
layers.
you're bouncing and praying and saying, whoever's listening up there, just let me make it. 'Cause
Isn't the taste was fine?
they're delicious. That's the problem. You eat 2 and you're like, God, these are good.
That was
Just eat the entire bag.
If they're sugar-free,
Exactly.
why not, right?
Yeah.
And sugar-free, like fat-free and gluten-free, does not always mean it's good for you. One of my coworkers, she's doing the gluten-free thing not because she has an allergy, but because she wants to lose weight. And I was telling her about this cake, and she goes, "Well, how many carbs are in it?" I said, "Well, I didn't know. I didn't look at it. I didn't think people would care. If you're eating a red velvet cake, the last thing on your mind is how many calories are in it." So I looked, and it's like 37 carbs per serving. I can't tell you what a serving is. It's probably like probably what I gave you. It's delicious, but just because it says fat-free doesn't mean it's sugar-free. Just because it says sugar-free doesn't mean it's good for you. Just research what you eat, or don't care.
It's trade-offs.
Yeah, it's trade-offs. Yeah. I personally would rather eat something full-fatted, normal, and eat a lesser amount of it. If I'm gonna put dressing on my salad, I'd rather have real ranch dressing and just not eat it.
When they first came out with the fat-free ranch dressing, I actually threw up when I ate it.
Oh.
So I never had it since then. And whatever they put in there, I'm allergic to that, and I'm not.
Not eating it again.
Never. They probably changed the recipe since then, but I
They
didn't
may
care.
have. They're always tweaking and changing things. At the panel I'll do tomorrow, I'll be side-by-side sampling. I said I made marshmallows. I also brought in just standard craft jet puff marshmallows. So you can try the commercial version versus the one I made at home. Caramels, traditional, the ones I made at home versus what you can buy in the store.
Yeah, there's the ones you made, I didn't have to worry about my films coming out of my teeth.
Oh, the salted version?
Yeah.
That's one of the things, it's a blessing and a curse with those caramels because it means anyone can eat them, but it also means they ship horribly. I've gotten more feedback from people who went to unwrap them and the caramel stuck all to the paper. I've changed to cellophane wrappers because of, how many people complain about the parchment paper. Or I had one person say, it showed up looking like a puddle of goo. I don't imagine it looked like that when you mailed it out. And I'm like, well, no. I'm just ladling caramel and adding some papers and she couldn't know. No, that's not what they're supposed to look like. I'm sorry, I don't sell them during the summer because,
With the marshmallows, do you know if there's a huge difference between using agar-agar and gelatin?
I wouldn't think there's a huge difference because the main thing with marshmallows is that as you whip them, it introduces air, and then as whatever your firming agent in there is, it forms pockets, like little tiny bubbles. So I would imagine if agar-agar can hold up to, maintaining those bubbles, it would probably produce something similar. However, I believe I've heard it's firmer. So you may get like a chewier marshmallow, like less like fluff than like
sell
Marrow.
mellow root.
Yeah. Yes, this is true. One of the things also with marshmallows, the very first time when I made them last year, I used a regular hand mixer. We have a standing mixer at home. However, I know it's worth like $200, $300 depending on what attachments you buy. I know not everyone's going to have a standing mixer, so I just used a regular old hand mixer, figuring most people are going to have a hand mixer. It was probably 2/3 the height of what I made this past weekend, just because it doesn't move quickly enough to introduce those bubbles before it firms up. So,
My family has one of those big ones. I know exactly what you're talking about.
all the ease that it, like all the trouble it saved me of having to stand there for 15, 20 minutes, moving it around the bowl, having to be able to set it. All that ease was offset by the fact that my niece was in there helping me. Like immediately when I went to pour it in, now she's right on top of me, and marshmallows everywhere. Marshmallow is one of those things that next to impossible to get out. Your water and it's sticky. I was sticky all over my arms for days. So 4-year-old's not allowed in the kitchen.
Peroxide works well with stickiness, it'll help you.
I was quite frustrated and a little bit sleep deprived because, working at a TV station with all this ice and weather, I wound up having to work extra hours that I then would have been spending at home making things. And so whenever I was at home trying to make things, I wasn't spending time sleeping. By the time I got here, all I wanted to do was sleep. I was up till 4 o'clock in the morning making this lovely slideshow, which I may just post a link to on my Facebook page because I want people to see it. And I can't show it. So, you better believe I'm not going to waste my time perfecting the other 2 presentations
Silly.
tomorrow.
There's good food stuff that must be tried.
Lots of food. I will
Must
clean
be
it up
tried,
before
must be
you.
tried, all of it.
That is red wine chocolate cake. I waited until you put it in your mouth to tell you it's gluten free. See, that's my thing. People who get so up in arms about, oh, gluten free, I can't.
Yes.
Cake is my favorite food in the world.
It's in
Oh, you haven't even tasted the jelly yet.
red wine jelly. In the little cups right
Oh, look, there's my cookies.
And there's beer bread that the jelly works great on.
And we do have a couple of caramels left. She's glad of that because I told her if we ran out of caramel, she'd have to cut more. And as it was, she was,
I'm not rushing you in any way.
no, it's fine.
I know we told you that no one was in here after you, but we just
Well, no, I
lost
know
our
you have to set up after me, so.
we lost our speed dating, so we're gonna slip in some speed dating here.
Oh.
Sneaky!
Uh-huh.
Sneaky, okay, so.
Okay, so we.
Yeah! No.
Yeah.
Feel free to have some extra samples before you head out, but, like,
Oh, you can use some samples to help these calm nerves for speed.
there we go. Everyone take a shot of jelly before you talk to me.
Yeah.
Sorry, how alcoholic is that?
Well, since it's cooked, it's not as bad. There's still alcohol content, as I covered earlier.
I think you could actually get buzzed off that jelly.
If you sat and ate the entire bowl, yeah. For that jelly, I used a $4 bottle of wine from Walmart.
Nice.
So,
Sorry to make
it was decent. That was another thing I wanted to mention. There's a mixed opinion on whether you should serve the wine you cooked with. Some chefs say no, some chefs say yes. It's a matter of taste. And if you like all of your meal to taste exactly the same, then sure, serve the wine you cook. Don't ever cook with cooking wine that you buy off the shelf. Don't cook with anything you wouldn't drink. The cooking wine on the shelf has so much salt added to it to keep it wines or shelf stable. It's not good to cook. Like, you're just better off buying a bottle of wine that you would drink, cooking what you need, drinking the rest. So as that is my closing remarks. I thank you kind people for putting up with my rambling.
Yeah, caramels.
I have not tried the gluten-free caramels yet, but I will probably look at it.
I know several people would be in particular that could work with butterscotch. Like when I first heard butterscotch, I didn't actually think it was butternuts because there was butter. I thought it was from butternuts.
Huh.
Because I know it's butternut tree, but then I found out, oh no, it actually comes from butter. So I was
I've never seen a little bit of caramel, mostly because the reactions in caramel is from the proteins and the cream and the butter.
There's chairs outside that are gonna come.